Namaste, and welcome to another Krishna book reading. My name is Janapati Das, and we are going to continue on with our Krishna story today. So please accept my respects, and let me offer my respectful obeisances unto my spiritual teacher, Jagat Guru Siddhaswarupananda Paramhamsa Srila Prabhupada, and my spiritual grandfather and translator of the Krishna book, His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. We are going to start with some hearing and repeating of Krishna's holy names, so please join along. If you haven't already, please take a moment to make a comment in the comment section and subscribe to my channel. Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Premate Siddhaswarupananda Paramhamsa Dinamine Nama Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Siddhaswarupananda Paramhamsa Vasale Gormakta Vrinda Haribol Nitagor Nitagor Haribol Haribol Nitagor Nitagor Haribol Haribol Nitagor Nitagor Haribol Haribol Nitagor Nitagor Haribol Hare Krishna Hare Krishna Haribol. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So, it's been a couple weeks. Thank you again for joining in. We are reading, of course, the very exciting story of Krishna kidnapping Rukmini, Princess Rukmini. And so, of course, in the last chapter that we had been reading, Krishna, of course, showed up, much to the happiness of Princess Rukmini, and quickly, as quick as possible, just came in, swooped her up on her chariot, and took off. And now, of course, this is where we've left off. So there now is going to be a great battle. We'll show it happen. Krishna defeats all the princes and takes Rukmini home to Dvaraka. This is chapter 53 in the Krishna book. All the princes, led by Jarasandha, became very angry at Krishna's kidnapping Rukmini. So, as you remember, that of course the princes are like drooling over the Princess Rukmini. She's the most eligible and qualified, wonderful princess, right? Very chaste, very spiritually advanced, to of course want to marry Krishna, but they're sitting there drooling over how beautiful she is, and how they wish that each of them could wish that they would be theirs, even though she was supposed to marry Shishupala. But now, boom, Krishna shows up and steals underneath their nose, and so they're all like, whoop. They're kind of trance is sort of broken, and they're like, oh, what just happened? So, struck by the beauty of Rukmini, they had fallen from the backs of their horses and elephants, but now they began to stand up and properly arm themselves. It's kind of funny, actually, because men are so weak in this way, when they're weak over sex. And it's usually the way that the woman will manipulate men, because they know that men are very weak when it comes to sex and anything related to sex, women. So they get kind of like, they fall off the horses and elephants because they're so like, oh, and then they're like, oh, wait a minute. Now they're going to fight. Picking up their bows and arrows, they begin to chase Krishna on their chariots, horses, and elephants. To check their progress, the soldiers of the Yadu dynasty turned and faced them. Thus, the terrible fighting began. Between the two belligerent groups began. The princes opposing Krishna were led by Jarasandha, and they were all very expert in fighting. They began to shoot their arrows at the soldiers of Yadu, just as a cloud splashes the face of a mountain with torrents of rain. Gathered on the face of a mountain, a cloud does not move very much, and therefore the force of rain is much more severe on the mountain than it is anywhere else. This is true even here on Oahu. I'm on what they call the windward side, because the windward side has all the rain, because we're in a huge mountain range, and usually the towns around this mountain range, because the humidity gathers in those areas on the mountain and can't really pass through the mountain, and so they just accumulate a lot of moisture and dump rain on those areas because of the mountain. And also in California, the Sierra mountain range is like that too. So places like Reno and Lake Tahoe that are run along this mountain range are very wet. But when you go over into Nevada, it's a desert, because no rain ever really gets there, because the moisture gets blocked by the mountain range. So it's very interesting. The opposing princes were determined to defeat Krishna and recapture Rukmini from his custody, and they fought with him as severely as possible. Rukmini, seated by the side of Krishna, saw arrows raining from the opposing party onto the faces of the soldiers of the Yadu. In a fearful attitude, she began to look on the face of Krishna, expressing her gratefulness that he had taken such a great risk for her sake only. Her eyes moving, she appeared to be very sorry, and Krishna could immediately understand her mind. He encouraged her with these words, "My dear Rukmini, don't worry. Please rest assured that the soldiers of the Yadu dynasty will kill all the opposing soldiers without delay." As Krishna was speaking with Rukmini, the commanders of the Yadu dynasty's soldiers, headed by Lord Balaram, who is also known as Shankarshan, as well as Gadadhar, not tolerating the defiant attitude of the opposing soldiers, began to strike their horses, elephants, and chariots with arrows. As the fighting progressed, the princes and soldiers of the enemy camp began to fall from their horses, elephants, and chariots. Within a very short time, it was seen that millions of severed heads, decorated with helmets and earrings, had fallen on the battlefield. The soldiers' hands were cut up along with their bows and arrows and clubs. One head was piled upon another, and one horse was piled upon another. All the infantry soldiers, as well as their camels, elephants, and asses, fell down with severed heads. When the enemy, headed by Jarasandha, found that they were gradually being defeated by the soldiers of Krishna, they thought it unwise to risk losing in the battle for the sake of Shishapala. Typical, it's like, typical demons. They're like totally loyalists. They're like, oh, we're loyal, but then when they see, oh, well, maybe it's not really worth, getting beaten again. Jarasandha is so arrogant. He got beaten almost 17 or 18 times from Krishna, and he was getting beaten again by Balaram in the Yadu dynasty. So he was like, Shishapala himself should have fought to rescue Rukmini from the hands of Krishna, but when the soldiers saw that Shishapala was not competent enough to fight with Krishna, they decided not to lose their strength unnecessarily. Therefore, they ceased fighting and dispersed. Some of the princes, as a matter of etiquette, appeared before Shishapala. They saw that Shishapala was very much discouraged, like one who had lost his wife, which he kind of did, actually. His face appeared to be dried up, and he had lost all his energy, and all the luster of his body had disappeared. They began to address Shishapala thus: "My dear Shishapala, don't be discouraged in this way. You belong to the royal order and are the chief amongst the fighters. There is no question of distress or happiness for a person like you, because neither of these conditions is everlasting." Which is true, right? Happiness and distress are, as stated in the Bhagavad Gita, like the winter and summer seasons, right? So you may like the winter season because you like to snowboard or ski, and you like the cold weather and the season of Christmas and all those kind of things. And then when summer comes along, you're not able to snowboard or ski, and then it's kind of hot and muggy. Or you might be the other way around. You like to go to the beach and you like to surf, and you don't like the cold weather. So it's kind of like happiness and distress, right? You have the happy things that sort of have the so-called material happiness. It's temporary. It kind of comes. You have it for a little while and it's gone. Or you have a distressful situation, financially or whatever it might be, and that's also temporary. So this point is true. So happiness and distress in the material world is like just kind of winter and summer seasons. They just come and go, come and go, and come and go. They are inherent in the material world. Take courage. Don't be disappointed by this temporary reverse. After all, we are not the final actor. As puppets dance in the hands of the magician, we are all dancing by the will of the Supreme. And according to His grace, only we suffer distress or enjoy happiness, which therefore balance equally in all circumstances. And the point about balance, as my spiritual master would always say, that life is kind of like the seesaw, right, on the playground. Sometimes you're up, sometimes you're down. Sometimes you're up and you're like, oh, you see yourself going up in a situation. Oh, something great is happening. I love it. This is great. You're up at the top. And then it's like, whoa. So now it's like going the other way. It goes up and it goes down. And then you're like, oh, what a bummer now. But then the bummer goes down. And the point is that you got to be equilibrium. You got to be despite the happiness and distress, you have to be the dhira person, or the person who's sober, the person who can see that there are material happiness and material distresses and unhappiness, but you remain equiposed during all of them and fixed on your service to Krishna. The whole catastrophe of the defeat was due to the envious nature of Rukmini's elder brother Rukmini. And we were talking about this point of envy and how much envy has a play in our forgetfulness of Krishna, right? This desire to feel like we should be the center of attention, not God, right? We should be the controller, the enjoyer, and we get frustrated consistently by the fact that we never really are able to hold on to this kind of real great enjoyment in this material world, because there's very little happiness and little in some distress, lots of distress, actually. And because we are not the controller and we are not in the right place, we are naturally the fish out of water in this situation. We need to be with Krishna in the spiritual world. Having seen his sister forcibly taken away by Krishna after he had planned to marry her with Shishapala, Rukmini was frustrated. She's frustrated. Why did this not work out? I set it up and, I was going to set her up and I was going to get Krishna then. And how did this happen? So he and Shishapala, his friend and intended brother-in-law, returned to their respective homes. Rukmini, very much agitated, was determined to personally teach Krishna a lesson. It's typical of an envious person. They just get kicked in the face, like the Jard Sanda. He gets beat 17 times, humiliated, and released, which in the code of Kshatriya ethics, it's better to be killed on the battlefield because at least you go to the heavenly planets, right? But in the case of being released and humiliated in front of everyone, that you got beaten and then you weren't killed on the battlefield, that it's like, you come back, you think, oh yeah, well, Krishna now has run away from me. Or in this case, I'm going to teach Krishna a lesson, even though you just got your ass whooped, just really bad by Krishna, right? So he and Shishapala, so he called for his own soldiers of military phalanx consisting of several thousand elephants, horses, chariots, and infantry, and equipped with this military strength, he began to follow Krishna to Dvaraka. In order to show his prestige, Rukmini began to promise before all the returning kings, "You could not help Shishapala marry my sister Rukmini, but I cannot allow Rukmini to be taken away by Krishna. I shall teach him a lesson. Now I'm going there." He presented himself as a big commander and vowed before all the princes present. This is the stupidity of a demon, right? A person acting demoniacally. They're so envious. Their intelligence is covered up, right? Not only am I going to chastise all these people that were leaving, but I'm also going to tell them, I'm going to make a vow that, basically shoot myself in the foot here. Unless I kill Krishna in the fight and bring back my sister from his clutches, I shall no more return to my capital city, Kandina. Which is a pretty big thing, because, if you've been born in an area that's very, very sacred, almost sacred to you. So to make a vow that I'll never come back again. And Kshatriya vow is like the blood vow. It's like you can't break that vow. There's many, many stories in the Mahabharata. For example, like Bhishma, who made a vow as a Kshatriya never to have children and never to marry, which is a huge vow as a prince in a huge kingdom, right? So he made that vow and he never broke it, even though so many situations it would have been better if he had, right? And he was told by he had a fight with his martial teacher Parashuram, and ultimately Parashuram fought with him over that, but he couldn't defeat Bhishma, so he just gave up. It's like just the way it is, Krishna's arrangement. So he says here, so he's made this vow. I make this vow before you all, and you will see that I shall fulfill it. And thus, vibrating all these boasting words, Rukmini immediately got on his chariot and told his chariot driver to pursue Krishna. He said, "I want to fight with him immediately. This coward boy has become very proud because of his tricky way of fighting with Kshatriyas." He's become proud, right? He's become proud. "But today I shall teach him a good lesson because he has the impudency to kidnap my sister. I, with my sharpened arrows, shall teach him very good lessons indeed." Thus this unintelligent man, Rukmini, ignorant of the extent of the strength and activities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, began to voice impudent threats. It's kind of like, going into a tornado or hurricane and yelling out at this sort of hurricane. It's like, you have no chance. He doesn't even see what he's up against. In great stupidity, he stood before Krishna, telling him repeatedly, "Stop for a minute and fight with me." After saying this, he drew a bow and directly shot 3 forceful arrows against Krishna's body. Thus he condemned Krishna as the most abominable descendant of the Yadu dynasty and asked him to stand before him for a minute so that he could teach him a good lesson. "You are carrying away my sister just like a crow stealing clarified butter meant for use in a sacrifice. You are simply proud of your military strength, but you cannot fight according to regulative principles. You have stolen my sister, now I shall relieve you of your false prestige. You can keep your sister under your possession only as long as I do not pinion you to the ground for good with my arrows." So this is very Kshatriya-like, people like throw threats at each other and, sort of like the warrior's way, right? Lord Krishna, after hearing all these crazy words from Rukmini, immediately shot an arrow and severed the string of Rukmini's bow, making him unable to use another arrow. Rukmini immediately took another bow and shot 5 arrows at Krishna. Being attacked for the second time by Rukmini, Krishna again severed his bowstring. Rukmini took a third bow, and Krishna again cut off its string. This time, in order to teach Rukmini a lesson, Krishna personally shot 6 arrows at him, and then he shot another 8 arrows. Thus, 4 arrows were killed by 4 horses were killed by 4 arrows. The chariot driver was killed by another arrow, and the upper portion of Rukmini's chariot, including the flag, was chopped off with the remaining 3 arrows. So you see here, it's kind of like, it's almost like Krishna is mocking him because he was like, "I'll shoot you," and then he destroys his arrow. "Well, I'll get this arrow, or this bow," and he keeps doing that. He tries to pick up a new bow, and Krishna keeps shooting the bow, and then he, boom, just like basically destroys everything around him. And you see what else happens to him. Having run out of arrows, Rukmini took the assistance of swords, shields, tridents, lances, and similar other weapons used for fighting hand to hand, but Krishna immediately severed them all in the same way. Being repeatedly baffled in his attempts, Rukmini took his sword and ran very swiftly towards Krishna, just as a fly proceeds toward a fire. As soon as Rukmini reached Krishna, Krishna cut his weapon to pieces. This time Krishna took out his sharp sword and was about to kill him immediately, but Rukmini's sister, Rukmini, understanding that this time Krishna would not excuse her brother, fell down at the lotus feet of Krishna in a very grievous tone, trembling with great fear, began to plead with her husband. So here we go. So Rukmini is like begging Krishna to spare. So of course Krishna will, because Krishna is under the control of the goddess of fortune, who is Rukmini Devi, and Radharani, same person. Rukmini first addressed Krishna as Yogeshvara. Yogeshvara means one who is possessed of inconceivable opulence and energy. Krishna possesses inconceivable opulence and energy, whereas Rukmini's brother had only limited potency. Krishna is the supreme personality of Godhead. All things emanate from him. All energies, all said in the Bhagavad Gita, the ability in man, the taste of water. There's so many things. All things come from Krishna. All things come from God. So it's not very hard to understand that, if you have someone who's has inconceivable, that means not to be able to be conceived by the mind. Many atheistic scientists cannot figure this out, and they get frustrated by it, and therefore they just kind of dismiss it as not as fantasy, because they can't conceive of it with their little pea brains. Krishna possesses inconceivable opulence and energy, whereas Rukmini's brother had only limited military potency. Krishna is immeasurable, whereas her brother was measured in every step of his life. Therefore, Rukmini was not even comparable to an insignificant insect before the unlimited power of Krishna. Krishna did it easily, He did it easily and very much enjoyable to him, I'm sure, in the spirit of a warrior. She also addressed Krishna as the god of the gods. There are many powerful demigods, such as Lord Brahma, Lord Shiva, Indra, and Chandra. Krishna is the lord of all these gods, whereas Rukmini's brother was not only an ordinary human being, but was in fact the lowest of all because he had no understanding of Krishna. So when we say gods, we have little g, right? A demigod, of course, is not a god. It's not a supernatural being. It is actually a material position. Brahma, Indra. These are all positions that are held by qualified living entities within this universe, and every universe has a Lord Brahma to navigate and to monitor the universe. Krishna is the Lord of all these gods, whereas Rukmini's brother was not only an ordinary human being, but was in fact the lowest of all, because he has no understanding of Krishna. This is why I like to keep coming back to these point of like atheistic people who often just kind of like dismiss things. They're not even at the state of Rukmini. Rukmini was an amazing warrior, a powerful warrior, much more elevated in capability than anybody of today, but we can still make a judgment call about the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the source of all things, including all demigods. And there are something like 33 million demigods in each universe, something like that, 33 million, and they are administrators of the particular parts of the universe. In other words, a human being who has no conception of the actual position is the lowest in human society. So that's how low they are. They're very ignorant, and sometimes they pose themselves as very materially intelligent, but the conclusions that they come to are really so ignorant and completely miss the point altogether. They don't even see it because they're so envious. Rukmini also addressed Krishna as Jagatpati. So no, it's not like Janapati. That's my name. Janapati is this Jagatpati is the master of the whole cosmic manifestation, but Janapati is the Lord of all peoples, right? The master of all of everyone, right? So when you say my name, Janapati Das, and you put the Das, it is the servant of Krishna, the servant of the Lord of all people. So here, Jagatpati is the master of the whole cosmic manifestation. So Jagatpati is a name of Krishna, and Janapati is also a name of Krishna. In comparison, her brother was only an ordinary prince. In this way, Rukmini compared the position of Rukmini to that of Krishna, and very feelingly pleaded with her husband not to kill her brother just before the auspicious time of her being united with Krishna, but to excuse him. In other words, she displayed her real position as a woman. She was happy to get Krishna as her husband, but just at that moment when her marriage to another was to be performed, but she did not want it to be at the loss of her elder brother. So she was very compassionate, who after all loved his young sister and wanted to hand her over to one who was, according to his own calculations, a better man. Right? We say his own calculations, even though Rukmini knew better. She knew that Rukmini had, good intentions. While Rukmini was praying to Krishna for the life of her brother, her whole body trembled, and because of her anxiety, her face appeared to be dried up. Her throat became choked, and due to her trembling, the ornaments on her body loosened and fell scattered on the ground. Lord Krishna immediately became compassionate and agreed not to kill the foolish Rukmini, but at the same time he wanted to give him some light punishment. So he tied him up with a piece of cloth and snipped at his mustache, beard, and hair, keeping some spots here and there. So this is actually quite an insult in the Vedic times to do this with Kshatriyas, kind of mocking the warrior. The warrior, of course, would rather be killed in honor and then to be captured and have his face and hair all cut up funny and released. While Krishna was dealing with Rukmini in this way, the soldiers of the Yadu dynasty, commanded by Balaram himself, broke the whole strength of Rukmini's army, just as an elephant in a tank discards the feeble stem of the lotus flower. In other words, as an elephant breaks the whole construction of a lotus flower while bathing in a reservoir of water, so the military strength of the Yadus broke up Rukmini's forces. Yet when the commanders of the Yadu dynasty came back to see Krishna, they were all surprised to see the condition of Rukmini. Lord Balaram became especially compassionate for his sister-in-law, who was newly married to his brother. In order to please Rukmini, Balaram personally untied Rukmini. In order to further please her, Balaram, as the elder brother of Krishna, spoke some words of chastisement. So he's like playing the role of the older brother. He's like, hey, bro, what'd you do here? Krishna, your action is not at all satisfactory, he said. This is an abomination very much contrary to our family tradition. To cut someone's hair and shave his mustache and beard is almost comparable to killing him. Whatever Rukmini might have been, he is now our brother-in-law, a relative of our family, and you should not have put him in such a condition. After this, in order to pacify her, Lord Balaram said to Rukmini, so he's giving instruction because Lord Balaram is actually the original spiritual master, so he can give good words of encouragement. You should not be sorry because your brother has been made very odd looking. Everyone suffers or enjoys the results of his own actions. Lord Balaram wanted to impress upon Rukmini that she should not have been sorry for the consequences suffered by her brother due to his actions. There was no need to being too affectionate towards such a brother. Lord Balaram again turned toward Krishna and said, My dear Krishna, a relative, even though he commits such a blunder and deserves to be killed, should be excused. For when such a relative is conscious of his own fault, that consciousness itself is like death. Therefore, there is no need in killing him. He again turned towards Rukmini, so he's giving like the opposite sides, instruction, and informed her that the current duty of the Kshatriya in the human society is so fixed that according to the principles of fighting, one's own brother may become an enemy on the opposite side. This is actually true, what happened also in the case of, the Mahabharata. The cousins were opposing sides, the Pandavas and then Duryodhana and his brothers. A Kshatriya does not hesitate to kill his own brother. In other words, Lord Balaram wanted to instruct Rukmini that Rukmini and Krishna were right in not showing mercy to each other in the fighting, despite the family consideration that they happened to be brothers-in-law. Sri Balaraman continued to inform Rukmini that Kshatriyas are typical emblems of materialistic way of life. They become puffed up whenever there is a question of material acquisition. So yeah, this is seen by many warriors in the stories of the Vedas, the Vedic stories, and where people get puffed up because they feel, in this case he was like, oh, Krishna took something that I set up, and screwed it up. Therefore, when there is a fight between two belligerent Kshatriyas on account of kingdom, land, wealth, women, prestige, or power, they try to put one another into the most abominable condition. Balaram instructed Rukmini that her affection toward her brother Rukmini, who had created enmity with so many persons, was a perverse consideration befitting an ordinary materialistic person. Her brother's character was not at all adorable, considering his treatment towards other friends, and yet Rukmini, as an ordinary woman, was so affectionate towards him. He was not fit to be her brother, and still Rukmini was lenient toward him. Besides that, Balaram continued, the consideration that a person is neutral or is one's friend or enemy is generally made by persons who are in the bodily concept of life. Such foolish persons become bewildered by illusory energy of the Supreme Lord. This is why Prahlad Maharaj, made a statement, of course I'm paraphrasing it seriously, but that, he'd seen this sort of situation in the kingdom, of the administration of the kingdom of his father, and people being their friends or they're being political enemies, and he did not like it at all, because as a pure devotee, he saw that all living entities are actually children of God. And so similarly, we have to remember that a lot of times we set things by people we like and people we don't like based on a bodily concept or materialistic way of life, not understanding that if a person is acting disagreeable in a situation, it's usually because of the illusion they think that they are their body. And so we should always remember that as devotees, that all living entities are spiritual and spirit souls. There's a lot to be said about that, actually. It's not like you would be like, let me hug a tiger because it's a spirit soul, right? You understand, you pay your obeisances from on the other side of the cage at the zoo, right? Or you say Haribol, because that spirit soul really believes that they are a tiger. And you just go in there and say, hey, we're brothers, and he's going to eat you, right? So it doesn't always apply. You can be respectful without being stupid. Such foolish persons become bewildered by the illusory energy of the Supreme Lord. The spirit soul is of the same pure quality in any embodiment of matter. But those who are not sufficiently intelligent see only the bodily differentiations of animals and men, literates and illiterates, rich and poor, and so on, which cover the pure spirit soul. And this kind of false identity with the body actually is the greatest problem in this world, because everyone bases everything, and all the world problems can be traced to that point of not understanding that all living entities are children of God, regardless of whatever body they're in. Such differentiation observed purely on the basis of the body is exactly like differentiation between fires in terms of different types of fuel they consume. Whatever the size and shape of the fuel, there is no such variety of size and shape of the fire which comes out. Similarly, in the sky there are no differences in size or shape. In this way, Balaram appeased them by his moral and ethical instruction. He stated further, this body is a part of the material manifestation. The living entity or spirit soul, being in contact with matter, is transmigrating due to illusory enjoyment from one body to another, and that is known as material existence. This contact of the living entity with the material manifestation has neither integration nor disintegration. My dear chaste sister-in-law, the spirit soul is, of course, the cause of this material body, as much as the sun is the cause of sunlight. And that's why it says, besides these, in chapter 7 of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna states the inferior energies of material energy, and he says, besides these inferior energies, there is a superior energy, which are all the living entities who are struggling with the material energy and trying to enjoy the material energy, and are sustaining the universe. So they're not only sustaining the universe, they're sustaining the material energy that makes up the body. So the body itself is animated not because of the body. The body is animated because of the presence of the spirit soul, the spiritual energy. The example of sunlight, the example of sunshine in the material manifestation is very appropriate in the matter of understanding the living entity's contact with this material world. In the morning there is sunrise, and the heat and light expand gradually throughout the whole day. The sun is the cause of all material production and shapes and forms. It is due to the sun that integration and disintegration of material elements take place. But as soon as the sun is set, the whole manifestation is no longer connected to the sun, which has passed from one place to another. When the sun passes from the eastern to the western hemisphere, the result of interaction due to the sunshine in the eastern hemisphere remains, but the sunshine itself is visible again on the western hemisphere. Similarly, the living entity accepts or produces different bodies and different bodily relationships in a particular circumstance, but as soon as he gives up the present body and accepts another, he has nothing to do with the former body. Similarly, the living entity has nothing to do with the next body which he accepts. He is always free from the contact of the bodily contamination. Therefore, the conclusion is that the appearance and disappearance of the body have nothing to do with the living entity, other than the fact that the living entity maintains and animates the material body, but the material body itself, there's no actual connection. When there is a waxing of the moon, we falsely think that the moon is developing. When there is a waning of the moon, we think that the moon is decreasing. Factually, the moon as it is always the same. It has nothing to do with such visible waxing and waning activities. Okay, so there is a lot more going to that. Let's see. Yeah, let me finish this last paragraph here. Consciousness of material existence can be compared to sleeping and dreaming. When a man sleeps, he dreams of many non-factual happenings, and as a result of dreaming, he becomes subjected to different kinds of distress and happiness. Similarly, when a person is in the dreaming condition of material consciousness, he suffers the effect of accepting a body and giving it up in material existence. Opposite to this material consciousness is Krishna consciousness. In other words, when a man is elevated to the platform of Krishna consciousness, he becomes free from this false concept of life. In this way, Sri Balaram instructed them in spiritual knowledge. He addressed his sister-in-law thus: "Sweet, smiling Rukmini, do not be aggrieved by false motives caused by ignorance. Due to false notions, only one becomes unhappy, but this unhappiness is immediately removed by discussing the philosophy of actual life," right? Bhakti Yoga. Be happy on that platform only. So very good spiritual instructions by the original spiritual master, Sri Balaram, to be discussing the philosophy of Bhakti Yoga, of Krishna consciousness, and you can be happy and understanding this knowledge. So there's a little bit more to this story. I think about three more pages, and we'll finish it up next time and continuing on to the next story as well. So thank you very much. Let's chant a little bit. Adibo nitako, nitago adibo, adibo nitako, nitago adibo, adibo nitako, nitago adibo, adibo nitago, nitago adibo. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Thank you very much for joining in tonight, and we will see you for the next story. Namaste.